morning, Tanya. I may ask you a question. You just mentioned to us you do not want to convince anyone to do anything that they do not want it. However, I have a case, the buyer and the seller agree. They sign the offer, and now the seller changed his mind and his reason because he would like to increase the asking price, which I told him, you have to think before you sign, and then this offer exactly the same when we listing the price. He said he doesn't care if the buyer mentioned about the legal binding. Yes, he gonna let the buyer due diligence, but he tell the buyer first. If the buyer back out, he gonna sue the buyer. So what do you suggest me to handle this situation, please?
So you said there was already a signed purchase agreement?
Yes, they did.
And now the seller is saying, okay, but despite the fact that we have a signed purchase agreement, I want to increase the price.
That's correct. He doesn't want to move on. He doesn't give his seller disclosure. He doesn't want to provide anything that the buyer requested. Unless if the buyer give him more money.
How much more?
40,000.
And what does your buyer say?
No, he said you list that price and we offer the first time the buyer offer the lower than that, and then the seller deny. Secondly, the buyer offer exactly the price we listed, and then the seller sign, and now he changed his mind.
Well, I mean, you can't force a seller to sell, right?
That's
According to
true.
the terms of your contract, your fee is due. If the seller accepted the offer and he refuses to provide the seller disclosure, refuses to provide due diligence documents and other things requested, then your fee is due. I would just send him a bill. I'd send him an invoice and see what he does with it.
Do
But
I have to give him a deadline? Can I email him and tell him, okay, you refuse it, but I give you another chance. I give him the deadline by the end of this week or next week. If he did not answer,
well, I mean, you can, you can give any deadlines you want. At this point, though, you've got an uncooperative seller, so you're not going to be able to force him to sell.
that's true.
And even if you can convince him to sell, he obviously doesn't want to, so his
Yes.
transition with the buyer is not going to be good. He's not going to train him properly. He's not going to transition things over properly. So at this point, I mean, like I said, I would just go back to the seller and explain to him, look, you accepted an offer. These are the terms of the agreement. And if you do not perform, then you're in default of the contract. And if you're in default of the contract, then according to the terms of the contract, my fee is due. And so here's an invoice for my fee. And I appreciate it, a demand, you can have an attorney write a demand letter or whatever, that says you got 10 days to pay the bill. But like anything else, oftentimes you're going to find that you can send somebody an invoice or a demand letter or whatever, they don't pay it. What's your next step after that? It's very expensive to litigate. It's very expensive to go, to go to court. So if depending on what that fee is, you're better off oftentimes trying to maintain a reasonable relationship and solve the problem amicably rather than trying to get an attorney involved to be nasty. So I would just send him, I would explain it to him and then just say, according to the terms of the agreement, my fee's due. Here's my invoice. I appreciate if you pay it.
Do I
And if
need
he
to find
doesn't,
the
then you need to go next.
Yeah, do I need to find the UCC check form now before I send him an invoice?
Your representation agreement gives you the right to file a UCC1. So if your rep agreement has not expired, then I would go ahead and do that.
Okay, thank you. I'll do
Yeah.
it. Thank you.
And you file a UCC1, and yeah, and then if he does try to sell in the future, that lien is gonna come up.
But
It'll
do I
show that
need
there's
to
a
let him
security.
know? Do I need to let him know that I filed a UCC check form, or I don't have to let him know?
You don't have to.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That answered my question. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
sure.
Thank
You know what, Diane? I had a similar thing a few years ago. I had a woman, I was representing the seller, and I took her through, brought her, lots of buy side opportunities, and she ended up accepting an offer. So the buyer presented the offer, the seller, my client, accepted the offer, signed everything, signed the whole contract, accepted everything. And then when it came time to close, she refused to close.
Yeah.
I mean, just there was no rhyme or reason of what she was doing. She just refused to close. And I was rather embarrassed because, I had taken, I never dual agent, so I was not representing the buyer, but of course I'm helping facilitate the deal and keep everybody, feathers unruffled and everybody together. And I couldn't even reason with the woman, the seller. So I sent her an invoice just like that. I highlighted that area in the rep agreement and the APA, the asset purchase agreement, that said, you've defaulted, you need to pay the commission, the fee, the broker fee. And she refused. And this went on for, the deal fell apart. Everybody went away. I was sitting there with egg on my face, really bummed out. And I finally, like a year later, I filed a UCC. Okay, that's always a good thing to do. And then like a year later, I had an opportunity to hire a collection agent, and she was an attorney. And so this collection agent went after this woman and sent her a letter, and the woman perked up, and she negotiated my fee less than what we had agreed to. And then the attorney took almost half of that. So in the end, it was like pittance that came out of it. But yeah, it's a bummer when that happens.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Well,
Thank
that's
you.
also why that I tell people on your minimum fee. So our contracts have a minimum fee. And so, if you're doing a $200,000 deal and your minimum fee is 20 grand or something, fine. If you're doing a $2 million deal, your minimum fee should not be 20 grand. Your minimum fee needs to be increased according to some semblance of what you think your fee is going to be when you close that transaction. And I personally, I try and set that minimum fee somewhere between 50 and 75% or 80% of what I think the actual fee will be, when it gets into those larger deals. If you're doing a deal that's, let's say $1.5 million, there's no reason you shouldn't have a minimum fee set at 100 grand. So what does that do for you? Well, when you get into the situation that Margot's talking about, where you end up if you have to go to a collection agent or you have to go hire an attorney or something, you can find an attorney to work on a contingency basis that will chase $100,000. But trying to find an attorney to work on a contingency basis for 20 grand, it's going to cost them more. Your court fees and all of that are, it's just very costly if you have to hire an attorney to try and do something. So the minimum fee, and then if you end up in mediation, same thing. A lot of times the mediator will look at the contract, say, well, your minimum fee was X. If they agree to pay you X, will you go away and settle for it? So if you're sitting there in mediation, your minimum fee is 100 grand rather than 20 grand, that's better. You have a lot better negotiating power, right? So yeah, minimum fees are a great thing in our contracts. And I've seen contracts where a minimum fee is hard coded into it, and the agents are not allowed to change it. And then to me, that's such a disservice to the agents, because you totally want to set that minimum fee based on the value of the transaction, so
And
that
we
it
had the
better
right.
protects you as the broker.
And we have the right to set up any amount we want. We have the
Yeah.
right to do. Oh,
Of
thank you.
course. Fees are
Thank
negotiable. So just like your percentage is negotiable, your minimum fee is negotiable. I've had people come back to me and say, "Well, I'm willing to pay you a percentage, but I'm not willing to pay a minimum fee. I want that zeroed out or deleted." And it's like, sorry, it's just not the way I do
Thank you.
business.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, some people would do. So those minimum fees are your friend.
Thank
Use them
you.
wisely.